Hello everyone and welcome back to Ruby Lessons on Codecademy. So in the last lesson we looked at the for loop, and before we continue on to today's lesson, I would like to add on to something that I was talking about in the last lesson. So because there are a few ways to do things in programming languages, you don't even have to use a for loop. You can use a while loop to do the exact same thing as a for loop. So here I've laid out a while loop that does the exact same thing as this for loop. So this while loop is equivalent to this for loop. So let's see how. I have made a variable n that is equal to 0. So we are starting at 0. While n is not equal to 21, so basically while n is smaller than 21, I could also do that. It doesn't really matter what I put there because of the code that I have inside the while loop. While that is true, puts n, increase n by 1, and then run it again. And this is going to be run until n is equal to 21. And that's going to happen after 20 loops. Oh, well, I get the exact same result as if I do this. Let's just make sure that I do. So let's just comment this out. I know that there's a faster way to comment it, but I can't be bothered to think about it now. And if I save and submit code, as you can see, I'm getting the exact same result with the for loop as I do with the while loop. So it's just an addition to what we were talking about in the last lesson. You can use a while loop, you can use a for loop. It really depends on your style of coding. And Codecademy even accepts this as correct code as well. As you saw at the start of the lesson, even if I don't have this, if I have the for loop commented out, it still accepts this as a correct program because it achieves the exact same result. So, okay, let's get on to today's lesson. The loop method. So far we've learned one way to repeat an action in Ruby, so that's using loops. So, as it is often in the case of Ruby and many other programming languages, and as we talked about in looping, there are multiple ways to achieve the exact same thing, even with different code. There's more than one way to accomplish a given task. In this case, it's also possible to repeat an action using an iterator. So an iterator is just a Ruby method that repeatedly invokes a block of code. The code block is just a bit that contains the instructions to be repeated, so basically what you're actually wanting to do. And those instructions can be just about anything you like. The simplest as long as you watch out not to make the loop infinite at the end. And we talked about infinite loops 2 lessons ago, so make sure to check out that video if you don't know what I'm talking about. So the simplest iterator is the loop method. You can create a basic but infinite loop by simply typing loop and then you loop something. And this is going to be looped, and all you're going to be seeing in your console is hello world, line after line, forever, until you close on the program or refresh the page in this case. So in Ruby, curly braces are generally interchangeable with the keywords do to open the block and end to close it. Oh, that's quite nice to know actually. Knowing this, we can write a smarter loop than the one above. So instead of having to write just one line, you can write multiple lines by doing loop do and then doing end. You could also probably replace the do with an opening curly brace and here an ending curly brace, which is probably what I'm going to be doing because I prefer that way of coding, just saying. So we have I equals 0, and as you can see this is actually quite similar to the loop that I was talking about at the very start of this lesson, so instead of the while. So we have I equals 0, loop do, I plus equals 1, it increases I by 1, it prints the value of I, so it prints 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it breaks if I is more than 5. So once I is 6, it's going to break, and therefore this isn't an infinite loop. So the break keyword is to get out of jail free card. It breaks the loop as soon as its condition is met. So in this case that's going to be once I is 6 or more. But because we're increasing it only by 1, it is going to be once I equals 6. Instructions: replace the underscores in the editor with the appropriate keywords. Check the hint if you need help. So, just looking at this code, we have I equals 20, okay, then we can do loop do. And I'm actually going to use an opening curly brace just to see what happens, because it says here that we can use anything. Or use either do end or curly braces. Here I'm going to replace the end keyword with the closing curly brace. So if I is less than or equal to 0, and we want that to be break if I is less than or equal to 0. Let's see what happens. Good. Even we're getting it in one line, so let's actually fix that by putting puts there instead of print. That should look much nicer. There we go. So it counts down from 20 to 1. It actually does, but it doesn't like it that way. Oh well, we can just stick to that. But if you wanted, it depends on what you want your program to print. If you wanted it to print with one line, a number a line, then use puts. If you wanted to print it like this, then use print. I don't really know what you would like this, but I guess it's your personal choice. So as you see, we have I, and then we say loop this until this condition is met. In that case, once that condition is met, break. So that's quite simple. Another way to do this is to use the while loop that I talked about at the start of this lesson. That's also iteration, but using a while loop. I know that I don't think that Python actually has this. Python does not have a loop method, which is why you would use either a for loop or a while loop. Moving on, so let's talk about the next keyword. So it can be used to skip over certain steps in the loop. For instance, if we don't want to print out the even numbers, we can write something like, so we have for I in 1 to 5, and in this case 5 is inclusive. Next, if I is evenly divisible by 2, so basically that's what this basically means, or I modulo 2, if you want to get more technical, or actually this whole line, this whole section means if I is evenly divisible by 2, print I. If it isn't, nothing gets printed. So in the above example, we loop through the range of 1 through 5, assigning each number to I in turn. So I is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. If the remainder of I divided by 2 is 0, so this, we go to the next iteration of the loop. Then we print the value of I. This line only prints out 1, 3, and 5 because of the previous line. So because of this line. Otherwise, it just skips this line and returns back to check whether this condition is still true. So instructions, add a line to your loop before your print statement. So, okay, before our print statement. Use the next keyword so that you skip to the next iteration if the number I is odd. So, next if I modulo 2 equals 1. And we don't have a colon there. I really want to put a colon there because I'm used to that, but it doesn't matter. Okay. Good. But I would rather that was puts just to show that we are actually getting the correct output. So if it's an odd number, it gets skipped because of this line. If it's an even number, because that's not going to equal 1, it's going to equal 0, then this line does get executed and so it gets printed. And also because we're starting at 20 and decreasing 20 by 1 instantaneously, we don't get 20 printed out either. If we started at 21, we would get 20 in there as well. But because we start at 20, we get 18 as the first number. And 19 gets ignored, well, because it's an odd number, and we are removing every odd number from our list. And let's put that back to print, because it doesn't like puts, and good. Moving on. Saving multiple values. So let's say we want to save a range of numbers in a variable. You can't just make one variable for each number in a loop. It's just impossible to do that. So how would we do this? A variable can hold only a single value, right? Well, in Ruby we can pack multiple values into a single variable using an array. An array is just a list of items between square brackets, like so. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, separated with commas, and in between square braces, or brackets, or whatever you want to call them, really. the items don't have to be in order. You can just as easily have 10, 31, 19, 400. Instructions: create a variable called myArray and set it equal to the numbers 1 through 5. There we go, inclusive in order. Good. So we have that. MyArray is equal to an array. So how do we actually access these values? Let's see. The DotX Iterator. Great work, you're really getting the hang of this. The loop iterator is the simplest, but also one of the least powerful. A more useful iterator is the DotEach method, which can apply an expression to each element of an object one at a time. So the syntax looks like this. Object.each, in this case the object is going to be the array that we're talking about. And we have the item, so we're selecting each item in turn, and then we're going to be doing something to it. You can also use the do keyword instead of the curly braces. It depends on your preference, as I said before. Object.each do item, and this. So this is just saying that you can do it this way or this way. And then you would end it with end here, which is commented out. That's probably by accident, as the curly braces here as well. So the variable name between the pipes can be anything you like. It's just a placeholder for each element of the object you're using .each on. So, as you remember, I'm just going to explain what item is. So when you're using a for loop, you have for num in 1.5, for example. Instead of using num, in this case we're using item, but using a different method, not a for loop. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, feel free to ask in the comments down below. So, instructions: take a look at the code in the editor. When you're pretty sure you know what it'll do, click Save and Submit Code to test your theory. So we have an array, and this is kind of bugging me that it doesn't have spaces in between. Array equals a list of the numbers 1 through 5. So basically what we created in the previous lesson. And to that, we're accessing each element by doing array.each, and we're calling each element x, and x is going to be equal to each element in turn. So the first thing x is going to be equal to is going to be 1. So x plus equals 10. Print the value of x. So the first one is going to be 11, 12, 13, 14, and then all the way to 15. So let's see if we are correct. Good, we are. And just ignore this. I will put this into puts just so that we can see it more easily. And good, so 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That is correct, because we are adding 10 to each of these values and then printing it out. Good. And I can actually save this for once with puts. I'm happy with that. Moving on. Try it out. So now it's your turn to take the .each method for a test drive. Good. Let's practice. So we have this code. Let's look at it. Numbers equals, so we have an array of the numbers 1 through 5. One way to loop. Numbers.each item puts item. Another way to loop is doing this. So it's showing us two ways to loop. One using curly braces, one using do end. So in the example above, we create an array called numbers, then we show two different ways to print each item in numbers to the console. So there are also two other ways to achieve the exact same result as using the .each. I will show that off just after we are finished with this section. So instructions: use the .each method on the odds array to print out the double of the value of each item in the array. In other words, multiply each item by 2. So let's do that. Odds.each, and then we open that and close it there. I always prefer to open and close it before I write anything, just so that I don't forget the closing brace. And I am going to be using opening braces instead of do end because I prefer it, as I've said before. And I will be calling the item I. And that's if I can find the pipe symbol. There we go. And then I will put I times 2. So 1 times 2, 2. 3 times 2, 6. 10, 14, 18. That does get printed out. Make sure you use print rather than puts. Oh, really? That looks so much worse though. Oh well. If that's what it wants, it gets it. So good. We have achieved what it asked us to do. We have accessed each of the elements and multiplied it by 2 and then printed it out. Moving on. The .times iterator. So the .times method is like a super compact for loop. It can perform a task on each item in an object a specified number of times. So it's basically a loop inside of a loop, from what I understand. So, for example, if we wanted to print out chunky bacon 10 times, we might type 10.times print chunky bacon. We don't know why we would type that, but we could. Of course, it's just an example. Instructions: use the .times operator to print out a string of your choice any number of times you like. Use the code in the text above as a guide if you need help. Okay, so it's not a loop inside of a loop. It's basically do something this amount of times. So how many times? Oh, that's too many times. Yeah, let's do just 5 .times. Then we can also do and end here. Even though I don't like to do it, I will show it off. Print. Yep, it wants us to use print. And my text message, because I'm very original. Good. Now we have finished it. So as I promised, I will also show off how you can do the .each method using for and while. So if you have an array that is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example, and you wanted to access each element in turn, you can also do for n or I or whatever item in array, and we can do puts item. Let's see what we get. Oops, okay, 1 second. And of course I forgot the end keyword. So as you can see, I printed out each item in turn from the array. And I can, before I print it out, I can do whatever I want to it. Item plus equals, I don't know, that number. And I'm going to get those numbers. Another way, so this is how you could do it with a for loop. Another way to do it with a for loop is to do 1.5 or 1. Actually, okay, that doesn't work. So 1.5, and then you can do array item home puts and end. Save and submit. And of course that should be a 0. I'm not going to go into much depth, but as you can see, you can do this to get the exact same result as .each. So this is another way to do it, if you know the length of it. Or there's a way to get the length of it, or at least there is in Python, but yeah, that doesn't matter. I just wanted to show that there are multiple ways of getting the exact same result. As you can see, 1 through 5, I'm printing out the numbers of array. I'm not printing out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individually. I'm getting the numbers from the array. So for example, if I change the 3 to that number, that is going to change. I'm not doing any magic. Another way, so that's how you do it with a for loop. How to do it with a while loop: I equals 0, while I doesn't equal 5. So once it equals 5, it's going to end. Then we have an end there. Similar to what I did in the last for loop, you can do array item, and of course we need to puts. Oops, and that's an infinite loop because I am not increasing I by anything. Okay, that was my fault. So while I doesn't equal 5, when I equals 0 at first, I plus equals 1, I will indent that, puts array square brackets. If you don't know what the square brackets are, I'm sure we will probably learn about those later on. I just want to show a few different ways of doing it for now. It's just to show that in programming there are various ways of doing one task, as it said before. So as you can see, we're going through the array and printing out each number in turn. But yeah, that's basically the lesson. I went quite a bit into depth and skipped probably a few of the lessons. So you will learn why I'm using the square bracket notation here in future lessons. But for now, as I said before, this is just another way of getting the exact same result. And if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, share and subscribe. If you didn't like it, give me a dislike and tell me in the comments how I can improve for next time. If you have any questions, do feel free to ask in the comments down below. Don't ask me too much about this because it will be covered in future lessons. And if it isn't, I will talk about it myself. And remind me if I don't, do feel free, it's fine. I will come back to it if needed. But yeah, until next time, thank you so much for watching and goodbye.